Sophia Brennan bought a deserted ranch house for $200. What she found locked in the root cellar made every sheriff in 3 counties refuse to investigate. Sophia Brennan stood in the driveway of the Mercer Ranch, clutching a deed that felt like it was burning a hole through her jacket pocket. $200. That's all it had cost to own 17 acres of high desert scrubland and a house that looked like it was held together by spite and peeling paint. The real estate agent, a jittery woman named Gretchen Lowell, had practically shoved the paperwork across the table at the diner, her hands trembling so badly she'd knocked over the salt shaker twice. "Just sign here," Gretchen had said, her eyes darting toward the door every few seconds like she expected someone to burst through and stop the transaction. "Cash only. No inspection period. You take it as is, and we never speak about this again." Sophia had hesitated, her pen hovering over the signature line. She'd been house hunting in New Mexico for 8 months, ever since the divorce finalized, and she'd decided to leave Denver and start over somewhere nobody knew her name or her mistakes. Her savings account held exactly $9,400, enough for a security deposit on a rental, maybe, but nowhere near enough for a mortgage in Santa Fe or Albuquerque where everyone from California and Texas was driving prices into the stratosphere. But $200? That wasn't a real estate transaction. That was a garage sale price for something broken. Why so cheap? Sophia had asked, and watched Gretchen's face go pale. The previous owner died 12 years ago. Estate's been in litigation. They just want it gone. Gretchen pushed the pen closer. "Look, I'm being honest with you because you seem like a decent person. This property has a reputation. People in Mineral Ridge don't like talking about it. But legally, it's sound. Title's clear. No liens. If you can handle some gossip and a lot of repair work, it's yours." Sophia had signed. She'd taken the key from Gretchen's cold fingers and watched the woman practically run to her car, speeding out of the diner parking lot like something was chasing her. Now, 3 days later, standing in front of the house in the harsh October sunlight, Sophia was beginning to understand why. The Mercer Ranch house sagged in the middle like a broken spine. White paint had peeled away in long, ragged strips, exposing gray wood that looked soft with rot. The windows were intact but filthy, covered in a layer of red dust so thick it looked like the house was bleeding. The front porch listed to one side, and several of the support posts had separated from the roof, leaving gaps that showed blue sky where there should have been shelter. Beside her, Sophia's dog, a black and tan Belgian Malinois named Riker, stood rigid, ears pinned flat against his skull. He was staring at the house with an intensity that made Sophia's stomach clench. Riker had been a police K-9 before an injury retired him. He tracked suspects through crack houses and meth labs without hesitation. She'd never seen him afraid of a building. "It's just old, buddy," Sophia said, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. But Riker didn't relax. He pressed against her leg and gave a low, anxious whine that vibrated through his chest. Sophia looked back at the house and felt something cold settle in her gut. This wasn't buyer's remorse. This was instinct, the same instinct that had kept her alive during 6 years as a crisis counselor in downtown Denver, the instinct that told her when someone was about to snap, when a situation was about to turn violent. This place felt violent. Not in an active way, but like violence had soaked into the wood and stone and was waiting for someone to wake it up. She pulled out her phone to call her sister, but there was no signal. Just empty bars and a no-service message. The nearest cell tower was probably 20 miles away, back toward the highway. She was alone out here except for Riker, and he clearly wanted to leave. Sophia took a breath, squared her shoulders, and walked toward the front door. The key Gretchen had given her slid into the lock but wouldn't turn. Rust had seized the mechanism solid. Sophia jiggled it, applied pressure, tried turning it slowly, then quickly. Nothing. The lock was frozen. "Great," she muttered, and walked back to her truck to grab the toolbox from the bed. She returned with a hammer and a flathead screwdriver, wedged the screwdriver into the doorframe near the lock, and struck it with the hammer. The wood was softer than she expected. The screwdriver sank in easily, and with a few more hits, the entire lock assembly tore free from the frame. The door swung inward with a groan that sounded disturbingly organic, like the house itself was exhaling. The smell hit her immediately. Not decay, exactly, but something stale and thick, like air that had been trapped for over a decade with nowhere to go. Dust particles swirled in the shafts of afternoon light coming through the grimy windows, moving in patterns that seemed too deliberate, too organized, like they were following currents Sophia couldn't feel. "Stay," she told Riker, but the dog was already backing toward the truck, his whine rising in pitch. Sophia stepped inside. The interior was frozen in time. Furniture sat exactly where it had been left, a faded floral couch, a rocking chair, a coffee table with a water ring still visible through the dust. In the kitchen, a coffee mug sat on the counter next to the sink, and a dish towel hung from the oven handle. On the small dining table, a newspaper lay spread open, yellowed and brittle, dated March 17, 2013. It looked like someone had just stepped out for a moment and never come back. Sophia moved through the room slowly, her footsteps loud on the hardwood floors that creaked with every step. 2 bedrooms, both with beds still made. A bathroom with towels folded on the rack. Everything was covered in dust, but underneath, it was all so normal. So ordinary. That made it worse somehow. She found the basement door in the kitchen, tucked beside the pantry. It had been painted over, the edges sealed with layers of white paint that had cracked and yellowed. But that wasn't what made Sophia stop. Someone had nailed 2 boards across the door in an X pattern, the nails driven deep into solid wood. Fresh nails. Not rusted or old, but shiny and new, maybe a year or 2 at most. Sophia ran her fingers along the boards. Someone had sealed this door recently, long after the house had been abandoned. Why would anyone come back to an empty house just to board up a basement door? She grabbed the hammer from her toolbox and pried the nails out. They came free with sharp squeals of protest, and the boards fell away. The door itself opened easily once the paint seal cracked, swinging inward onto darkness and stairs descending into earth that smelled like clay and iron and something else, something that made Sophia's mouth fill with the taste of copper. She pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating rough wooden steps leading down into a basement with dirt walls and exposed ceiling joists. But halfway down the stairs, the light caught something that made Sophia freeze. At the bottom, sitting in the center of the dirt floor, was a steel door built directly into the ground. Not a wooden hatch. Not a simple trapdoor. This was industrial-grade steel with a circular will lock like something from a bank vault, and around the edges, someone had welded it completely shut. Sophia descended the stairs slowly, each step producing a hollow thud that echoed in the confined space. The basement was small, maybe 12 by 15 feet, with earthen walls that looked hand-dug and a low ceiling that forced her to duck beneath the joists. But the steel door dominated everything, impossible to ignore. It was roughly 4 feet in diameter, perfectly circular, set flush with the dirt floor. The wheel lock in the center was massive, designed for serious security, and the welding that sealed it shut was crude but thorough. Ugly beads of metal ran along every seam, applied by someone who cared more about effectiveness than appearance. Sophia crouched beside it and ran her hand along the cold metal. It was seamless except for the welds, no manufacturer's marks, no serial numbers. Custom made, probably. She knocked on the surface with her knuckles. The sound was hollow, deep, suggesting a significant chamber below. "What the hell?" she whispered. Root cellars were common in old ranch houses, places to store food and supplies before refrigeration. But root cellars had wooden doors, simple latches, maybe a padlock if you were worried about kids. You didn't install industrial steel and weld it shut unless you were trying to keep something in or keep someone out. Sophia stood and looked around the basement. In the corner, she found a workbench with old tools, a rusty handsaw, a hammer, some wrenches. On the wall above it, someone had hung a calendar from 2013, frozen on March. The same month as the newspaper upstairs. She climbed back up, retrieved her toolbox from the truck, and returned with the angle grinder she'd bought for home repairs. Riker was still outside, pacing by the vehicle, barking occasionally in short, sharp bursts. Back in the basement, Sophia plugged the grinder into an extension cord she'd run from the kitchen outlet. She put on safety glasses, took a breath, and squeezed the trigger. Sparks exploded across the dirt floor as the cutting wheel bit into the weld. The screech of metal on metal filled the basement, echoing off the walls until Sophia's ears rang. She worked methodically, cutting through each section of weld, the acrid smell of hot metal filling her lungs. It took 40 minutes to cut through completely. When the last section gave way, Sophia shut off the grinder and let the silence settle back in. Her hands were shaking from the vibration of the tool, and sweat had soaked through her shirt despite the cool underground air. She gripped the wheel lock and turned. It moved smoothly, too smoothly for something that had been sealed for years. Someone had maintained it, oiled it. The mechanism clicked as the lock disengaged, and then the door lifted on hydraulic hinges with a hiss of released air. Cold rushed out, impossibly cold for October in New Mexico. And with it came a smell that made Sophia step back, chemicals, preservatives, formaldehyde maybe, and beneath that, something organic and wrong, like meat that had been kept too long even in a freezer. Sophia leaned over the opening, shining her phone's light down. A metal ladder descended about 12 feet into a concrete chamber. The walls were smooth, professionally poured, painted white but stained with rust and water damage. And lining those walls were metal shelves, industrial storage racks, filled with dozens of cardboard file boxes. Her heart was pounding as she climbed down the ladder. The chamber was larger than she'd expected, maybe 15 feet square, with a ceiling just tall enough for her to stand upright. The temperature was significantly colder than the basement above, cold enough that she could see her breath misting in the beam of her flashlight. The boxes were organized meticulously, each one labeled with a year and a name. The dates ranged from 1998 to 2013, and the names were all different: Holloway, Vasquez, Brennan, Torres, Whitfield, Chen. Brennan. Her surname. Sophia's hands went numb. She pulled the box labeled Brennan 2009 from the shelf. Inside were file folders, each one thick with documents, photographs, and newspaper clippings. She opened the first folder and saw her father's face staring back at her from a driver's license photo. Thomas Brennan. Her father, who had disappeared when she was 19, who had gone out to check on a property dispute and never come home. The police had investigated for 6 months before concluding he'd abandoned the family voluntarily, that he'd been depressed about money troubles and had just left. But here was his entire life, documented in excruciating detail. Property deeds showing he'd owned 80 acres adjoining this ranch. Letters from a company called Sonoran Future Holdings offering to buy his land. His refusal letters. Then police reports about vandalism, cut fence lines, poison wells. And finally, a missing person report filed by Sophia's mother, marked closed voluntary departure by someone named Sheriff D. Wade. Sophia sat down hard on the cold concrete floor, the folder shaking in her hands. Her father hadn't left them. He'd been investigating something, fighting something, and then he'd disappeared. She opened another box at random, Vasquez 2006. Same pattern. Property ownership, refusal to sell to Sonoran Future Holdings, harassment, disappearance. The police reports were all signed by the same person, Sheriff Dalton Wade. Box after box, the same story repeated. 23 files total, spanning 15 years. 23 people who had owned property in the area, who had refused to sell, who had been harassed until they vanished. And every single case closed by Sheriff Wade as voluntary departure or assumed relocation. At the bottom of one box, Sophia found something else, a Sheriff's Department evidence bag, sealed with red tape. The tag read, Case hashtag 2011-0847. Opened in error. Resealed by order of Sheriff Dalton Wade. Do not open under penalty of law. Sophia's hands were shaking as she broke the seal. Inside was a .45 caliber bullet, a fiber evidence bag containing what looked like carpet fibers, and a photograph. The photograph showed a concrete foundation, recently poured, with something dark staining one corner. On the back, someone had written in neat handwriting, Holloway property, basement pour, August 13, 2011. Sophia's stomach turned. This wasn't just evidence of harassment or intimidation. This was evidence of murder. And someone in the sheriff's department had found it, bagged it, and then buried it here. She climbed back up the ladder, her legs weak, her mind racing. This house, this property, it wasn't just a cheap real estate deal. It was the archive of a serial killer, or a conspiracy, or both. And whoever had sealed this vault had done it to hide evidence that could destroy powerful people. The previous owner's name came back to her, James Mercer. Gretchen had said he'd died 12 years ago. But what if he hadn't just died? What if he'd been murdered for collecting all of this? Sophia was halfway up the basement stairs when she heard it, a vehicle pulling into the driveway, tires crunching on gravel. She froze, listening. A car door opened and closed. Footsteps approached the house. Then a knock on the doorframe, loud and authoritative. "Hello? Anyone home?" A male voice, calm and friendly. "This is Sheriff Wade. Just doing a welfare check on the new property owner." Sophia's blood turned to ice. Sophia stood frozen at the top of the basement stairs, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Sheriff Wade was at her front door. The same man whose signature appeared on every single closed case file in that vault below her feet. The man who had marked her father's disappearance as voluntary, who had buried evidence, who had protected a conspiracy for 15 years. She forced herself to breathe slowly, quietly. Through the kitchen doorway, she could see his silhouette through the dirty front window, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a tan uniform and a wide-brimmed hat. He knocked again, louder this time. "Ma'am? I know you're in there. Saw your truck outside. Just want to make sure everything's all right." His voice was patient, almost kind, but Sophia had spent 6 years as a crisis counselor learning to hear what people weren't saying. Under that friendly tone was something harder, something calculating. He wasn't here for a welfare check. She glanced down at the basement. The steel door was open, the vault exposed, boxes pulled out and sitting on the dirt floor. If he came inside, if he went down there, he would know immediately what she'd found. Sophia grabbed the basement door and pulled it shut as quietly as she could, then shoved a kitchen chair under the handle. It wouldn't stop him, but it might slow him down. She walked to the front door, wiping her dusty hands on her jeans, and opened it halfway. Sheriff Dalton Wade stood on her porch, one hand resting casually on his belt near his radio. He was in his late 50s, weathered face, gray at the temples, with pale blue eyes that didn't blink enough. When he smiled, it didn't reach those eyes. "Ms. Brennan, right? Sophia Brennan?" He touched the brim of his hat. "Welcome to Mineral Ridge. Sorry it took me a few days to come by. We like to check in on new residents, make sure they're settling in okay." "I'm fine," Sophia said, keeping her body in the doorway, blocking his view of the interior. "Just unpacking." Wade's eyes drifted past her shoulder, scanning what he could see of the house. "Place looks rough. Hope you got a good deal on it." "Good enough. Mind if I come in? Just want to make sure the structure's safe. Old houses like this, sometimes the floors are rotted, electrical's dangerous. Hate to see someone get hurt. I appreciate the concern, but I'm actually heading out soon. Maybe another time." Wade's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Won't take but a minute." He took a step forward, and Sophia instinctively shifted to block him. His eyes narrowed, just slightly, and she saw the calculation happening behind them. He was deciding something. How hard to push? How much authority to invoke? "Sheriff, I said another time." Sophia kept her voice level but firm. "I have a right to privacy on my own property." "Of course you do." Wade stepped back, hands raised in a gesture of surrender, but the friendliness had drained from his voice. "Just trying to be neighborly. This property has a complicated history. Previous owner was a troubled man. James Mercer. You know anything about him?" I know he died 12 years ago. That's right. Heart attack, right here in this house. Sad story. He was paranoid toward the end, thought people were after him, started collecting things, building projects. Sheriff's department had to intervene a few times for his own safety. Sophia said nothing, just watched him. She'd learned in her counseling work that silence made people uncomfortable, made them talk more than they intended to. Wade shifted his weight. The thing is, Mercer left behind a lot of materials. Documents, files, things he claimed were evidence of crimes that never happened. We had to confiscate most of it after he died, but there might still be some junk around here. If you find anything like that, you should let me know. Some of it involves private citizens, ongoing investigations. Not the kind of thing civilians should be reading. I'll keep that in mind. You do that. Wade pulled a business card from his shirt pocket and held it out. My direct number's on there. You find anything unusual, anything at all, you call me first. Don't go talking to anyone else about this property or what you might find here. Mercer's accusations caused a lot of good people a lot of pain. We don't need that reopened. Sophia took the card without looking at it. Anything else, Sheriff? Wade stared at her for a long moment, those pale eyes searching her face. You seem like a smart woman, Ms. Brennan. Smart enough to know when to mind your own business. This county's a good place to live if you don't make trouble. People who make trouble, well, they tend not to stay long. It wasn't quite a threat, but it was close enough. Sophia felt Riker press against her leg from inside the house, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Wade's eyes flicked to the dog, and something shifted in his expression, weariness, maybe even fear. That's a police dog, isn't it? Wade asked. Retired. He's a pet now. Wade backed down the porch steps slowly, never taking his eyes off Riker. Well, you folks have a good evening. Remember what I said about calling me first if you find anything. He walked to his cruiser, a white Ford Explorer with Mineral Ridge Sheriff emblazoned on the side, and drove away slowly, deliberately, like he wanted her to watch him leave. Sophia waited until his taillights disappeared down the dirt road before she allowed herself to breathe. Her hands were shaking. She closed the door, locked it, and slid down to sit on the floor with her back against it. Riker whined and licked her face. She wrapped her arms around his neck and held on, trying to slow her racing heart. Wade knew. He might not know exactly what she'd found yet, but he knew she'd been in that vault. That's why he'd come so quickly. Someone must have seen her truck, called him, told him the new owner was poking around. And now he was watching, waiting to see what she would do. Sophia pulled out her phone. Still no signal. She was completely isolated out here, cut off from help, from witnesses, from anyone who could verify what she'd found if something happened to her. She thought about getting in her truck and driving away, just abandoning this place and pretending she'd never seen what was in that vault. But then she thought about her father. About the photograph of him in that file, his whole life reduced to evidence of a crime no one had ever investigated. About 23 families who had lost people and been told they'd left voluntarily, been told to move on, been told to stop asking questions. No. She wasn't running. But she couldn't stay here alone either. They moved quickly, gathering the files, heading toward the small door at the back of the sanctuary. But before they could reach it, the front door burst open and Sheriff Wade walked in, flanked by 4 deputies. All of them had their hands on their holstered weapons. That's far enough, Wade said calmly. His voice echoed in the empty space. Ms. Brennan, you've had a busy evening. Making calls, organizing people, stirring up old trouble. It's not old trouble, Sophia said, stepping forward. Riker moved with her, positioning himself between her and the sheriff. It's 15 years of murder you've been covering up. Murder? Wade smiled, but there was no humor in it. That's a serious accusation. You have proof of that? 23 files worth. Every victim owned property near the Sonoran development sites. Every victim refused to sell. Every victim disappeared after you closed their harassment complaints. Alleged victims. People who chose to leave. It's not my fault their families can't accept that. My father didn't leave, Sophia said, her voice cracking. Thomas Brennan didn't abandon his family. You know that. You know exactly what happened to him. Something flickered in Wade's eyes. Your father was a troublemaker. He wouldn't let things go. Just like Mercer. Just like you. Where is he? Sophia took another step forward. Where did you bury him? Wade's hand moved to his weapon. I'm giving you one chance. Hand over the files. All of them. Every copy, every photo, everything. Do that, and you can walk away. Keep living your life. Forget you ever bought that property. And if we don't? Then you'll disappear just like they did. And in a few weeks, I'll close your case as another voluntary departure. A troubled woman who couldn't handle her divorce, who ran away to start over somewhere else. People will believe it. They always do. Not this time, Marcus said, holding up his phone. Because this entire conversation is being recorded and live-streamed to a private server. Even if you take our phones, the evidence is already out there. Wade's face went pale, then red. You're bluffing. Am I? Check your own phone, Sheriff. Check social media. We've been uploading files for the last hour. One of the deputies pulled out his phone, tapped it, and his face went white. Sheriff, it's true. There are documents being shared. Pictures of files. People are already commenting. Wade's composure cracked. He pulled his weapon and aimed it at Sophia. Stop the upload. Now. Can't, Sophia said, surprised by how steady her voice was. It's automatic. Every file is being released whether we do anything or not. Behind Wade, more headlights appeared. But these weren't sheriff's vehicles. A sedan with Albuquerque Journal placards in the window pulled up, followed by a news van with a satellite dish. Laura Mendez had arrived early, and she'd brought a TV crew. Cameras started recording. Reporters climbed out, filming Wade standing with his gun drawn, surrounded by his deputies, facing a group of unarmed civilians. Sheriff Wade, Laura called out, her voice clear and professional. Laura Mendez, Albuquerque Journal. Can you explain why you're threatening these people? Wade lowered his weapon slowly, his face a mask of fury and defeat. He knew he'd lost. The story was out, the cameras were rolling, and there was no way to cover this up. This isn't over, he said quietly, but everyone knew it was. 3 months later, Sophia stood at the Sonoran Future Holdings development site and watched as forensic teams excavated the third foundation. They'd found remains in the first two. DNA testing was underway, but preliminary results had already identified 2 of the victims from the vault files. Sheriff Dalton Wade was in federal custody, charged with conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and violation of civil rights. 7 executives from Sonoran Future Holdings had been arrested. The mayor had resigned. And the FBI had taken over the investigation of all 23 disappearances. Patricia Vasquez stood beside Sophia, watching the excavation. They're going to find Miguel, she said quietly. I know they will. And my father, Sophia added. They'd become friends over the past months, bound together by shared loss and the long fight for justice. The families had all become close, supporting each other through the investigation, the media attention, the slow grinding wheels of the legal system. Sophia's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, they found another set of remains. Dental records being checked now. She looked at the ranch house in the distance, the property she'd bought for $200 that had changed everything. She'd decided to keep it, to renovate it, to turn it into something good. A place for families of the missing to gather, to remember, to heal. Riker barked once, sharp and alert, pulling her attention to the present. A forensic anthropologist was waving them over. Ms. Brennan? Ms. Vasquez? We'd like you to come down. We think we found them. Sophia took Patricia's hand, and together they walked toward the truth they'd been seeking for 15 years. The vault had held its secrets for so long. But secrets, once exposed to light, couldn't survive. Justice had been slow. But it had finally arrived.